Okay, great.
Okay, let's get started. So this is, welcome everybody. This is the second day of the webinar on reforming Asian utilities, reforms for boosting private investment. I'm Peter Morgan, Vice Chair of Research at ADBI. I won't go through all of the instructions, since I think most people have already seen them yesterday, but I would remind people to keep their video and microphone switched off except when they're presenting. So therefore we can save some bandwidth. So without further ado, let me invite Dr. Aravinda Nepal to chair the first session. He's Senior Lecturer in Economics at the School of Accountancy, Economics and Finance at the University of Wollongong. So Professor Nepal, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much, Dr. Peter Morgan, and welcome to day 2, session 3, everyone. So this session is titled Reforming Utilities for Reducing Greenhouse Gas Emissions. A very interesting and a very important session for sure, because you heard from yesterday's from our session chairs and most of the speakers about the inability of the reforms that caught the utility sector of the developing countries in the 1990s, not being able to deliver the environmental objectives that each nation, each developing and emerging nation around the world are striving for today, right? So the market-based reforms that were advocated in the early 1990s have failed in delivering the environmental objectives. So what next then? So what should the reforms look like? So it's about reforming the reforms. So we have a couple of speakers today who will enlighten us further on this issue. And our first speaker is Dr. Huaping Sun. He's a professor at Jiangxi University in China. And his presentation will be discussed by Dr. Mohammad Arif, lecturer at Shahid Benazir Bhutto University in Pakistan. And this presentation will be followed by another interesting presentation by Dr. Saqib bin Amin from North-South University in Dhaka, Bangladesh, to be discussed by Dr. Mohammad Mashin from the School of Economics and Finance from Jiangsu University in China. So the speakers will have 15 minutes to present their paper, while the discussant will have 10 minutes, and each presentation and discussant will be followed by a 10-minute Q&A. So without any further delay, I would like to pass on the mic to Professor Huaping Sun. So please take center stage.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Okay, thanks, brother. I'm so glad to, give my speech about the energy carbon emission reduction of China's transportation utility and input-output approach. Okay, so can you hear me? The PPT is clear?
Yes, everything is clear. Please proceed.
Okay, fine. Thank you. I'm so glad to join us again. And I'm from Jiangsu University, China. Okay, so my report have 4 points. First is general background, and the second is literature review. Third is the methodology and the results. The last point, the conclusion and policy implication. Okay, first, let's take a look for the general background. Actually, carbon reduction matters for every country till now. For China's transportation, carbon emission account for almost 10% of China's total carbon emissions. This data from IEA last year, and the transportation industry has become one of the China's 3 major carbon emission industries. Actually, the largest one is electricity and heat producers, and so the transportation ranking 3rd. Okay, so that's a basic idea. And then according to the International Energy Agency, the transportation industry has become the world's 2nd largest. That means in China it is ranking 3rd, but worldwide is ranking 2nd. in 2018, and its emissions account for 25% of the world total carbon emissions. Okay. Specifically for China, we have 3 reasons to do that. First, for a long period in the future, the Chinese government will continue to maintain a relatively high or stable economic growth rate to meet the needs of the social development and employment, and the steady growth of the economic speed will stimulate the growth of demand of transportation industry in various industries. Okay, because we know the transportation industry has specific industrial linkage with other industries. Okay, so the economic will booming still at least 20 years. Okay, second, the urbanization rate in China is still low comparatively with other countries, even neighbors, right? As we know, Singapore is almost a city country, so I mean almost 100%. Well, the general average is about 70%. Well, in China, only half. That means 50% for urbanization rate till now. So the further development with the urbanization in the future will inevitably lead to an increase in demand for the urbanization, urban transportation industry, because in urban, almost everyone need a car, right? Thirdly, the energy consumption structure of China's transportation industry is dominated by fossil energy such as diesel, gasoline, and fuel oil. Okay, based on above 3 points, it can be concluded that the implication of emission reduction in China's transportation industry is very severe and urgent problem. Okay, well, for our paper, we have 3 points for innovation. First, we use the input-output analysis method to unify the energy supply side of the transportation industry and the demand side of the transportation industry, and also analysis the carbon emissions and emission reduction issues of China's transportation industry more comprehensively. Okay. Second, we use the expanded structure decomposition model and analyze the effects of changes in the specific energy structure on the energy supply side on the structure of the transportation industry. Okay, and thirdly, we use the expanded structure decomposition model and analyze the effect of changes in the demand of various industries in the final demand effect of the transportation industry. So it provides a theoretical analysis framework or basis for China's transportation industry to implement more precise emission reduction policies at the level of energy type. Okay, so that's the first part. Second, it's some literature review. Okay, we have 2 points. First, from the perspective of direct carbon emissions in the transportation industry. Okay, and okay, so the sound is okay? Okay. B from Harbin University, he used a non-reducible DA model to measure the transportation sector's regional energy and environmental efficiency during the period of 2006 to 2010 in China. And Zhang and Wei also analyzes the dynamic changes of CO2 emission performance of TFP in transportation utility. And Huang used the indexed decomposition analysis to also study the energy intensity and energy utility technology, the effect on the carbon emission in transportation sector. And also Feng, that means this year, he used an LMDI. This is very popular and unifies the method to analyze the impact of energy consumption structure on carbon emissions in transportation industry. However, there is a little literature focused on the transportation energy supply side effect relatively. there is even less literature to analyze further the impacts of changes of 11 different energy consumption structure. That means more specific, more detailed on the carbon emissions of transportation industry. Second, from the perspective of indirect carbon emissions in transportation industry. Besides the direct one, indirect side also important. Decomposed factor that affecting green gas emissions based on KR framework. Okay. Also, Fan and Lee, also based on the KR model, identified and built a multivative generated phase index to study the impact of 6 factors on CO2 emission of transportation utility in Beijing city. As we know, Beijing and Shanghai, these metropolitan cities is key point for transportation emissions. Okay. Anna Lin from Xiamen University examined the process of China's carbon emission from transport sector as well as socio-economic factors on carbon emissions of the provincial level during the year 2000 to 2015 by a top-down method. Okay. Actually, we can see there are few work of literature on the effect of final demand on the influence of transport carbon emissions. And less literature further refine the analysis of different industry in the final demand effect of the influence in this sector. Okay, so that's our job. We make it two sides. One is supply side, another is demand side, and also we focus on the specific detailed industrial structure. So the core data selected in this paper are input-output tables from China's 2007, 2010, and 2011, 2015. The input-output table is not renewed every year. So the corresponding transportation utility energy consumption data is also from here. In order to simplify the analysis of results, we merged 22 industries into 9 departments according to Jiang's paper. Okay, here is the merger details. You can see agriculture. We include agriculture, forestry, animal, and also fisher. Okay, and similar. Okay. Also, we have the light industry, heavy industry, and the chemical industry. Also here, transportation and service. You can see services a lot. Okay. Here, the input-output method, we can see is based on the Leontief model, right? It's originated from him. He got the Nobel Prize, right? Here, the E means the input, AIG is the input amount of the I sector required by the G sector for each additional output value. Therefore, the above input-output analysis can also be expressed as follows. That means use metric method. You can see X is different to the output of the sector G, while the Y, here the Y means the final demand of the sector G, while the total output metric X is here, and the total demand matrix is Y. Okay, so now we use the combined not only the input-output model and also SDA model. For the SDA,
sorry about this. You have 3 minutes. Sorry.
Okay. The transportation utility generates carbon emissions due to the use of the CO2. Here is the function. You can see our model. And then the SDA model, we decompose the total effect into 4 points. Here is the details. The first one is the energy structure effect. Second, energy intensity effect. Third one is the input-output efficiency effect. And the final demand effect. Okay, so that's the framework, theoretical framework. Now let's take a look at the key results. The impacts of the 4, you can see the 4 points. The 4 factors is follows. We can see the energy intensity effect is always negative, right? You can see the second line, right? second line. Well, for the final demand effect is always positive. That means the last one. Well, for other two also have negative and positive, means mixed. Here we can see the contribution of CL its effect. You can see for the energy intensity effect, it's the red one. In the nearest 3 years, it's negative, the biggest negative, right? Well, the final demand is the biggest positive effect, right? And okay, from the year of the our sample, you can see different effect is different, effect function. First one, the final demand effect is the main driver. Well, the energy intensity effect is the main restricting factor. Well, the input, output efficiency structure effect has a slight stimulus effect. Well, the last one, the effect of the energy structure has a certain inhibitory effect. You can see the last one for the picture. Picture is about the desil oil is the biggest one, right? Okay, so last point for the conclusion. Firstly, the energy intensity effect and the input structure effect are the main factor for the long-term emission reduction in China's transportation utilities. Therefore, the government needs to actively promote the upgrading and innovation of energy utility technologies. Well, second, the energy supply side of the Chinese transportation sector should still promote the energy consumption structure in the future. And then it's necessary to encourage low carbon travel and the development of low carbon transportation industry. So compared to other industry, heavy industry has a higher direct consumption coefficient of the transportation. So carrying out the industry structure optimization is also necessary. And it's a very good tool for the policy maker. So that's all. Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Sun, for covering the interesting utility sector of transport. And so your presentation now will be followed by a 10-minute discussion by our discussant, Dr. Mohammad Arif.
Okay, thank you. Now it's okay to.
Yes.
Okay, how?
Yeah, Dr. Mohammad Arif, please share your screen if you wish.
Yeah, just in a moment.
Oh, let me write.
So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So thank you very much, everyone, Dr. Rabindra, Dr. Farad, for this opportunity. So I will be just discussing some of the main topics, main points from this presentation. First of all, I would like to congratulate Dr. Son on a very interesting paper. Right. So I find the paper very interesting and I enjoy reading that. So my discussion will include 4 points: the summary of the paper, general assessment, relevance of the study to the current literature, and the suggestions for improving the paper. So just to summarize, the paper presents analysis of factors that contribute to reduction in CO2 emissions in transport utility sector of China. Right. So the author emphasized the choice of transportation sector as it is the second largest contributor of CO2 emission worldwide and third largest for China as well. So the paper considers very important context if we see that, because the transport utility sector is a very big emitter of CO2 emissions. And the authors also emphasize that because China is a developing country, so this sector would continue to be a biggest emitter in future because of the urbanization and because of the steady growth from China.
Yeah. That's true.
So the authors identified 3 factors: energy intensity, final demand, and energy structures as the major factors that contributes to CO2 emissions and emission reduction.
That's
So
right.
my general assessment about the paper is the paper explores a very relevant policy topic and in a very equally important context, because if we see that transport sector is very important, and if you see that in the context of China, it becomes even more important. And the use of expanded structural decomposition model and input output analysis is also very important, like, because when they are considering input and output analysis, so this is also very interesting. So I find that very interesting, and I think this is kind of a major contribution of the paper. And coming to the findings of the study, so findings of study are policy relevant and practical. So because they consider a very practical approach, so the findings are very practical and they are policy relevant, right? So coming to the relevance of the study to current literature. So as the authors discuss the literature in detail, so the literature finds, like, literature has so many studies, but the use of input and output analysis, so this is the most important point that author contributes to the literature. And the case of Chinese transport sector is again one of the contribution to the literature, right? So I find that 2 of these contributions that are very relevant to the current literature. Now, coming to my suggestions, so the paper is very well written, but if the authors try to incorporate some of the suggestions, the first suggestion is the paper will benefit from the inclusion of robustness measures. So the author should include some of the robustness measures for their results, because I think this is one of the major, you can say, weakness of the paper, if you say. And the author should explain more explicitly the changes observed in the coefficients. So if we see the coefficients of, let's say, intensity, right? So intensity has different coefficients for different periods. So 2007 coefficient is very different from 2015, right? So you need to explain more explicitly why these coefficients are different over period of time, right? And the final suggestion that I have is, again, the statistical significance of the results should be discussed more explicitly. So because, like, this is one of the major concern of every reviewer when they are reviewing the paper. So you need to consider the statistical significance of your results. Yeah, so this is all from my side. And again, thanks everyone from Indra, Dr. Swan, and Dr. Farad.
Okay, thank you,
Yes,
Professor Atif.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Arif, for your in-depth discussion of the paper by Dr. Sun. So, Dr. Sun, would you like to respond to the comments and suggestions made by Dr. Arif, please?
Okay, thank you, dear Rabindra. Okay, so dear Arif, thank you for your nice and very, very good, important response and comments. And okay, so nice suggestions. I remember every point. Actually, you are right. We need to do more robust check. We will explain more why carbon intensity this effect, the coefficient is different with other 2. Actually, we did some because we are doing the revision after the first round. Okay, so and the last one, some also more near, more fresh literatures we will add into our paper. and also explain more about the conclusions and also policy implications. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Sun. So now we are open for questions and comments, ladies and gentlemen. So please, the floor is all yours. Any questions?
Bindra, I have a question.
Yes, Peter,
yeah,
please
thank
go
you.
for it.
Yes,
Yeah.
thanks very much. Yes, I was a little bit unclear what's included in the definition of the transportation utility sector. Is this the entire transport sector, or is this some subset such as things like railroads and subways and things like that? Or I mean, I was a bit confused by the terminology of utility when applied to the transportation sector.
Okay, thank you, dear Peter Morgan. Actually, in our paper, we define our, the sample is based on the Chinese statistical yearbook. Okay, so the scope is about only 2 points. One is the transport sector and also logistics. Okay, logistics. In the inner city, subway is not included. It's divided into other points, just like the service. So the 2 points. So the data is continuously same scope with every year. It's based on the China's statistical yearbook. Okay, thank you.
But in what sense is that a utility? I guess that's my question.
Okay, so the utility, as in China, we focus on the transportation is like energy and electricity is kind of the public sector. It's not differently or simply with the private firms, because it's always operated by SOE and also big firms. So we that means this sector is different, it's unique. It's just like the electricity. So we take it as the public utility also. Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you. So transport is another network industry that you are looking into apart from electricity, right? So in that sense, okay. So
Okay,
yeah, thanks for that. Yes. Any other questions, please? The floor is open for questions, and we have time for this. So yes, Tina, please.
Thank you so much. Koting-san, thank you for your presentation. I have a paper also on input-output model, but didn't use transportation. So I read some papers. There are many studies on China, right? China is like quite leading in this literature. Yeah, I wonder what assumptions did you use for improvements in technology? Did you add like electric vehicles, something like new in technology? Did you add that? Renewable energy, energy efficiency, I don't know, electric vehicles?
Okay, dear Dina, thank you for your good question. Yeah, you're right. So SDA model and also input-output model are also very good model. So we combine them together, not only use only one input-output model, but make them together. Because, for the input-output, it is good at the make it clear for the industrial linkage, different sectors and different regions. Well, for the SDA, that means the decommission can make it more and more detailed into different level, even for sector, even for factors. So we combine them together. So this is very okay. Thank you.
Yes, so Dr. Suru, we have a couple of questions from the audience here. So Asim Saha writes, what should we do to take initiative about industry sector emerging to avoid climate change impact in LMIC?
Okay, very good, very good. Welcome any problem. Thank you.
And the next question that Neeraj Paisa has raised is, many economists believe that using CGE model is often desired as clear improvements over input-output model. So why the authors did not apply CGE instead of input-output models?
Okay, thank you. You're right. So the CGE model actually also used in some scenario. Actually, for us, we want to make it more connected with SDA model, so it's easier or better to use input output and SDA. Well, if it's a CGE, it will be independently used better, not related to SDA. So that's the reason. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. So I have a couple of suggestions for you based on the comments raised, as well as my own impression of the paper. So as Dr. Peter Morgan already highlighted, so in your title of the paper, you mentioned that you are examining the transportation utility, but then how you define utility, and
Okay.
is it actually a network industry that you are looking into rather than a utility? So that conceptual misunderstanding needs to be clarified at the first place. And the second suggestion I have for you is in terms of the policy implications. These policy implications are directly relevant to China for sure, as China is your specific case study for this research. I think it can also be framed for more greater relevance, in other emerging and developing economies too. So maybe you can expand on the scope of your policy implications. So that's my suggestion. So any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? We have some time for that, please.
Thank you so much, Ravindra.
Nice presentation, Professor Hopkinson.
Yeah,
Very nice
Mumu.
presentation.
Thank you, Mumu. Thank you,
Yes.
brother.
Uh,
Okay,
well,
very good.
Any comments, any questions, please?
So Mumu, it's your turn to do the presentation next one, right?
So if there are no
yesterday I have
questions,
already done. So today
Oh,
I wrote.
Okay, very good.
so it seems that we have no questions from the audiences as well as from our presenters and discussions yet. So without any further delay, I would like to thank Dr. Huaping Sun once again and Dr. Mohammad Arif as well for your nice discussion, and Dr. Sun for your insightful research, and also to the participants for your questions and comments. So now I would like to move on to the next presentation then by Dr. Saqib bin Amin, titled Regulatory Reform and Relative Efficacy of Government versus Private Investment on Energy Consumption in South Asia. And this presentation will be discussed by Dr. Mohammad Mohsin. So Dr. Saqib, without any further delay, please take the stage.
Thank you very much, Ravinder. Can you hear me properly?
Yes, absolutely.
And you can see the slides.
We can't see your slides yet.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ravinder, for your nice sharing. Good morning to all of you. So it is my honor to share my research findings in this platform, and I like to thank ADBI to organizing this event and inviting me as a speaker. So my name is Saqib bin Amin, and I'm working as an associate professor at North South University, Bangladesh.
Dr. Saqib, we don't see the slides yet.
Okay, sorry. Can you see it now?
No.
We can upload it from here if necessary.
Let me try once.
Okay, it's again. Coming now. Yeah, it's fine now.
We can see
it. So sorry about this inconvenience. Now it is visible, isn't it?
Yes, you might want to go full screen as well if you wish.
Yes, full screen, please.
Okay. It works?
Great.
Okay. Sorry for this inconvenience. So the title of my today's presentation is Regulatory Reform and the Relative Efficacy of Government versus Private Investment on Energy Consumption in South Asia. And this is a joint paper with Professor Turaj Jamshab and Dr. Rabindo, Nepal. So as we all know that energy plays a very decisive role in the development process of any country. It not only enhances the productivity of factors of production, but also promotes high level of living standards across the world. Therefore, detecting the key determinants of energy consumption at different level of the economy becomes an important research question, globally, since energy has great importance for many countries' economic stability. Although it is widely acknowledged that investment is one of the important stimulator of the energy uses, existing empirical literature finds sort of like, ambiguous result. For example, some of the literature reveal that like there is a positive association between the investment and energy consumption and vice versa. So especially what was surprising to me, like, we are expecting that investment should have a positive impact towards the energy consumption, but we have got some sort of like, odd results. So while trying to know the intuition behind these odd results of having an inverse relationship between investment and energy consumption, we realized that the relative effectiveness of the government investment and private investment on energy sector needs further attention and investigation. Okay, so that is the like sort of main motivation of this paper. Moving on, like since the South Asian countries are booming and have emerged already as one of the most dynamic economic regions, and they seem to be more reliant on the energy consumption in their day-to-day lives, also in the production processes, like affordable energy is expected to improve the welfare of the people within the region. Previously, Nepal and Paija argued that energy sector in South Asia demands significant resource allocation and investment for the faster economic development in South Asia. At the same time, given the resource constraint within the region, it is vital to know the relative effectiveness of the different types of investment under the reform initiatives towards the energy sector. And it's obvious, like dependence on the efficiency, the policymaker might introduce the reform policies to further strengthen the region's energy security and for future economic stability. It happens in many cases, government energy utilities experience from large debts and could not properly utilize the investment efficiently for the mobilization of the energy sector. This might happen as the government investment major share is used to finance the public utilities debt using the decade-old like equipments. So there are some sort of depreciation cost. So rather than focusing on the productivity investment. Jamshab also highlight that efficiency improvements are the main dominating reasons for privatization and adopting utility reforms like the regulatory reforms in the region. So, to our knowledge, no previous study examines the relative efficiency of the government versus private investment on energy users in South Asia under the reform instruments. So in this study, actually, we aim to fill this gap in a panel framework. I would like to remind you that although the existing literature of energy sector reform discusses the impact of reforms on the sectoral performance and sort of its link with the broader welfare indicators, we realize that there is a gap in terms of like in scrutinizing reform effects on the investment like propensity that changes the level of energy consumption worldwide. So we will consider South Asia as the in our panel framework. So actually, there is a nice study by Takizade and Hisari and Yoshino who actually discussed actually they formulated a very good model, relating the energy uses with some other very important economic factors. So we adopted that model following Takizade Hisari, and we define a production function. Actually, they consider a production function which is in line with the concept of the ecological economists who believe that like energy resource needs to be included in the production function in addition to capital and labor. So basically the theoretical foundation of this empirical model originated from that ecological equation. Y is a function of K, L, and energy. And then after defining the economy-wide resource constraint, we maximize the profit functions and obtain the first order conditions. The detailed specification are already given in the paper for those who would like to go through that in detail. And you can see we have derived this equation. So where We have also considered the log linear specification. So energy consumption is considered as a function of output, capital, labor, real exchange, and price level. So this is the benchmark actually, to be honest. You can see there is no reform instruments or any sort of like, privatization in this initial model. So what we have done after that, so you can see in the previous model, there is we consider the aggregate capital, but then following an article by Hawk 2012, we divide the total investment like between government investment and private investment, which is also seen in some other literature. So you can consider this. This is our benchmark model where actually now we divided the capital between these two sectors. This is the benchmark model. And then we have added some reform instruments, and we are motivated by the following studies. As you can see, Imam et al., Shin et al., Shen et al., and Zhang et al. So following those studies, we have introduced a few of the control variables, which you can see RIT. Okay, so RIT includes the reform variables, including the privatization in the power sector, and also the establishing an independent regulatory commission and the corruption level. So we know that actually the panel data shows the cross dependencies across the cross sections. That's why the Pesharan's cross-sectional augmented Dickey-Fuller and the cross-sectional augmented IPS test are used to check the stationary properties. Then we also consider the issue of the structural break in the panel test. So also done with the stationarity structural break checks. Then the Darby-Haussmann test is applied to find the variables co-aggregating relationship, which actually provides a very robust result. And finally, we can see the Dimitrescu-Harling-Granger causality test is applied. So you can see that here in the estimation test, we have considered the pool mean group a panel ARDL model to check the relationship among the different variables. This is because of the cross-sectional dependency. Okay, and to get a very valid result, long-term valid result of the variables. So I just like to emphasize on the fact that the PM panel ARDL model seems to be more robust than the panel fixed effect, random effect, and the GMM in the long run estimation. So although the pool ARDL model is reported, but we have also done the sensitivity analysis, and we have found the similar results. I can send you the results if anyone wants. And variables have been taken from the world development indicators, world governments indicators, and the British Petroleum. The time framework is 1980 to 2016. So first of all, the table 1 and 2, you can see that shows that variables are interrelated within the cross sections as shown in the Bruce-Egan LM test, then the Pesharan scale LM test, also the Pesharan CD test shows strong cross-sectional dependence in the variables. So also you can see the table 2 outlines the results of the slope homogeneity test. We can see that a significant level of heterogeneity exists in all the concerned models. So the fact is that given the issue of the cross-sectional dependency and the heterogeneity, we could not adopt the conventional unit truth test. So that's why we have considered the CIPS and CADF test actually, and we can clearly see that all the variables are stationary at the first difference form. Then we have also you can see this table 4 shows that the variables have unit truths in the presence of the multiple structural breaks at levels, which confirms that the variables are not mean diverting. Okay, and also the table 5 shows confirms the co-integrating relationship among the variables. Now this is the most interesting findings. Table 6 actually summarize the main findings of this research. As you can see from the benchmark model, without having any sort of reform initiatives, you can see that most of the variables are insignificant, although they show sort of like expected results, but they're insignificant except the private investment, which is, I should say, actually weakly significant at 10% level. So since we could not find any significant relationship between the variables, okay, then we actually realized probably let's check how the results will be changed in case we introduce the reform initiatives. So the model 1 actually controls for the effect of privatization in the energy sector, which is augmented with the corruption index. Once again, the regulatory reforms have not been included in model 1, but to some extent, as you can see, that it shows a better result as the variables seems to be coefficients as seems to be significant and compared to the benchmark model. However, still we could not find any significant relationship between the government investment and the energy consumption. Once again, that's why we actually introduced the binary dummy variable. Okay, we introduced a dummy of the independent regulatory model in the benchmark model, in addition to the interaction term we have used in the model 1. So model 2 differs from model 1 and the benchmark model in a sense. Model 2 includes the reform instruments, the regulatory reform instrument. So still something is missing. Even in the presence of the like reform initiatives, like regulatory reform, government investment could not seems to be significant. Okay.
Dr. Saki, we have 5 minutes, please.
Okay, I think I can finish by that time. Thank you for the reminder, Ravindra. So the main argument is that the private investment again found to have a meaningful positive relationship with the level of energy consumption. Okay, and interaction term at this time, like is not significant, which is indicating that introduction of the regulatory body diminishes the negative effect, okay, that we have showed in the previous column. This is, to be honest, consistent with the findings of Sen et al. In 2015. And we can also see that the impact of private investment seems to be more effective under the reform initiatives. As a 1% increase in investment, you can see, like, increase the energy consumption by 0.52% in the long run. So it seems that the presence of a regulatory body along with the privatization may optimize the required level of energy consumption through strong monitoring and different financial and pricing mechanisms. Okay, so this is the table that shows like the expected causal relationship within the variables. So what is our main point of argument? What do we like to conclude? So given our results, we propose a few policy implications for the improvement of the energy sector within the region. First, as you can see, that we argue that low efficiency and inadequate government investment management may delay project implementation and have little impact on the energy consumption. Therefore, the critical issue in improving government investment efficiency is to assure appropriateness in project evaluation and the selection. Second, to have a significant impact on the regulatory body towards the government investment and to further strengthen the effectiveness of the private investment, top priority should be given to ensure the bureaucratic reform of institutions associated with the energy technology and infrastructural development, sort of financing the mechanism, for example, subsidy disbursement, demand side management, what I say for by demand side management, demand forecasting, the energy efficiency mechanism, so on and so forth. And finally, the planning and the dissemination. It is already evident that the absence of decentralized institutions' administrative power within a centralized system hinders and may delay the implementation of the proper regulatory policy frameworks. And finally, we recommend further strengthening the capacity of the regulatory institutions within the region to prepare credible and predictable energy policies. We also argue that a well-articulated, well-defined regulatory institution can further mitigate the market-related uncertainties, may ensure the cost-reflective pricing, create more opportunities for the new investment, which will be ensuring the energy security for the region in the future. And that's all from my side. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Saqib. So what was a powerful message from your presentation was that the success or failure of privatization or any private involvement in the power sector is strongly linked to the existence and the nature of the regulatory body. So this is certainly consistent with the theoretical literature and the empirical observation. So, okay, so but that was just my opinion, but I would like I would now like to invite Dr. Mohammad Mohsin to actually discuss your paper. And Dr. Mohsin is at Jiangxi University in China, as I repeat. So Dr. Mohammad Mohsin, please take center stage. Dr. Mohammad Mohsin, are you around?
I don't see him on the panelist lists currently. He may have lost the connection.
It seems, it seems so, Peter. So shall we take on few questions before? Oh, I think he's back on now. So, all right. Hello, Dr. Mohammad Mohsin. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, I think he's. Yes, Dr. Mohammad Mohsin, how are you?
I'm fine, sir. Actually, I'm very sorry. I have internet problem, but now it's okay.
Yeah, no worries. So we're waiting for you, and you are right in time. So please proceed.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much, Professor Rabindra, to give me opportunity to discuss the paper. And also, I'm thankful to Professor Amin by presenting a very nice piece of information. So I have few suggestions to improve the paper. So let me upload my comments. Just 1 minute, please. Okay, so can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screens.
Yes, it would help if you can enlarge the
regarding
text.
the paper,
Can you enlarge the text a bit?
So
it's a bit hard to read.
detecting the key studies.
Dr. Mohsin, can you please enlarge the file you have shared so that we all can see it properly?
So is that okay?
Yes, please proceed. So we don't want to lose any time more. So any more time.
Okay, so
yes.
Given the resources constraint when the South Asia region, it is important to know the relative effectiveness of the government and the private investment. So under the same umbrella of the investment for the government sector and the private government and the private investment under the reform initiative towards the energy sector. So depending on the relative efficiency, reform steps need to be further strengthened regarding the sustainable energy supply. So same like we have argued that we cannot ignore the environmental issues. Same the issue is here. I suggest that it should be strengthened with the sustainable energy supply with economic stability. And the second point is that I want to know which variable has been used for the regulatory reforms in the empirical estimation. So definitely the authors have performed certain set of empirical estimation from econometric theories. So definitely they have used some variable. So my main concern is about the regulatory reforms. Either it has been used direct data, or any proxy has been used to measure the regulatory reform. And then third is how you have measured the privatization corruption. So you have used any proxy, or you can find any direct data at the public database. And then again, I have concern about the stationary properties. So, so how about the finding of the structural break augmented panel unit root test? And then my question is that what are the main findings regarding the regulatory reform? So definitely, if you have used any proxy or any variable to measure the regulatory so how we can interpret these regulatory reforms in this analysis? And the last point, authors claim that low efficiency and adequate government investment management may delay the project implementation. So I think it's a general statement, better to formulate a policy framework based on your finding. So that's what I have little bit concern about your paper. And again, I'm thankful to you to by presenting a very nice piece of information. That's what I have to put.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mohammad Mohsin, for a very detailed discussion on the paper presented by Saqib. So, Saqib, would you like to respond to Dr. Mohsin's comments?
Yes, yes. Like it is better if you can actually see the comments properly. Now it's
Sure,
moving.
sure. Yes. So, Dr.
There
Mohsin,
are a couple of comments.
Mohammad, please share your screen as it stands. Okay. So,
Oh, now I can see only comments. Last comment. Can you please scroll up a
yeah.
bit? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Mohsin, for actually your nice comments. I do appreciate. So the first thing, as I can see, which variables has been used for regulatory reform. So actually it was mentioned the following the most of the literature, it's sort of a dummy variable, whether the countries have the regulatory body. If they have, then we take one, and if there is no regulatory body, then it should be zero. Actually in the paper there is a table about this, so we actually uh, followed that table to define the dummy variables in the model. Regarding the measurement of the privatization and the corruption, actually privatization, it's once again dummy, and like in the World Bank there is a corruption index, so we consider that index. Once again our like selection of variables is backed up by the existing literature. We made sure these index or variables that we are using previously used to the other like energy literature as well as. So that was the response of question 3. Number 4, for the stationary properties CATF. So these are the second generation unit to test, and I'm I have seen a lot of literature actually who were used this methodology to examine the stationary test. And how about the findings? Yes, so yeah, that was the since we have mentioned that we had some issues in the variables, that's why we opted to go for that panel ARDL test. So it was clearly mentioned, to be honest. And what are the main findings regarding the regulatory reforms? So the main findings of the regulatory reforms is that under the presence of the regulatory reforms, to some extent we can see that the private companies or the private investments seem to perform better within the South Asian region. So as you can see, if you have a look of the magnitude of the coefficient, you can see the difference. So what we try to say that we try to argue that, so regulatory reforms in the South Asian region show a bit of the, a positive implication towards the energy sector. The and paper lacks discussion section, sensitivity and analysis. We have given the footnote actually, and if I'll double check, like, I try to explain as much as possible, but I'll appreciate your comments if I'll have a look again to make sure in case there is any sort of, like, further clarification I can include. I will do that. I will happily do that. And final one, we argue low efficiency in adequate government investment. Okay. The thing is that if you look at the South Asian perspective, so how can we define the public utilities? They're using the most, like, 100 years old decade equipment. So my argument is that investment is went to the public sector. But the thing is that probably rather than using this investment to the more productive sector, probably these are, diverted, sort of crowding out effect. These are diverted to the, improvement of the existing capitals within the energy sector. So that's why we mentioned that, like, we could not get the significant result. And that is the reason why I am arguing that low efficiency, low productivity about in this paper. And obviously, if you have, like, this sort of decade-old equipments, if you do not import like modern equipments, then how can you expect that you can expedite the implementation procedure? That obviously delay the project implementation, and you can expect sort of, like, less impact on the energy sector. So that is my reply, Robindro. Thank you very much once again, Dr. Mohsin, for your nice, like, valuable comments.
Okay, thank you, Saqib, and thank you to Dr. Mohsin for again raising these important comments. As one of the co-authors, I would also like to respond to one of the points you have raised, and that is with regards to the construct of the reform method. So it is very common in this strand of literature that the reform scores are pretty much binary. So if there is, let's say, if you want to capture, for example, the entry of the independent power producers, if they have entered in a particular year, so for that year you assign a score of 1, otherwise 0. So that's how you construct all the reform variables, and then that will allow you to capture the effect of each and every reform and its impacts on the power sector performance, right? But having said that, there are quite a lot of criticisms around these reform measures, that are based around this binary construct. So novelty, if you are interested to study further about reforms and so forth, the novelty would be around how you can actually construct a new measure of reforms. So that's my experience, given my major research thrust around assessing power sector reform outcomes in both developing and developed economies. So, okay, so now the floor is open for questions.
I have some clarification or questions.
Yes, Ghazi, please go for it.
Yeah. Okay, the first, I have some just clarification. The investment data, is it the government investment and private investment? It is particularly in the energy sector, or it is in total aggregate one? That's my one of the important question, because if it is in aggregate one, then we need to know what are actually the share of the energy sector investment in order to get a proper proxy for aggregate, like government investment and the private investment as a proxy for this study. So that's, I'm a little bit interested to know. Probably it was written in the paper, but I didn't look at the paper yet. The second important thing is when you look at the investment side, in particular in South Asia, or in most important case for Bangladesh, we have in the energy sector, there is a lots of investment is called PPP, public and private investment. So how did you classify in that time the investments is amount of money is invested in the public sector or private sector, or it could be separate? So how did you quantify these issues in the PPP investment? So that's my second query. And third query, or a little bit related to the econometrics model. So as we are working on, if I understand correctly, 28 years of 5 countries. So it's less than 150 observation in the panel data. So, and also we identify the structural break for respective countries in terms of the structural break for the unit truth process. My question is, like, is it the structural break that we tested? Is it just for arbitrary basis to look at the break, or does it the break also can be connected to the corresponding year, some sort of policy reform in the energy related areas or investment related area that connected to the investment? So then I think the point is raised, if econometrically we can not solve it, at least bet argument, if the break date or the break year is connected to the some policy regime or policy related issues, why don't we consider this break is a dummy in the model rather than look at the dummy variable? So then the motivation of the econometric motivation of the break is also has an intuitive in terms of statistically that can detect it. And secondly, it also can be explained through the policy related or regulatory regime change. So both way it could be connected. Otherwise, like, what are the motivation to included structural break based unit truth test? So this is the one my just concern. And second one is, as we are using the 150 less than 150 observation, I agree that it is, we are using the panel autoregressive distributed lag approach, and also the co-integration process, but it would be need to be motivated why we are using. Is it because if I just look at quick snapshot, is it the series are between I0 and I1 process, like stationary versus non-stationary, or integrated of order 1, integrated of order 0, and in order to adjust this mechanism, we are looking for ARDL approach? Or otherwise, the counter question could be, why don't we looking for the Pedroni, which is become more well established co-integration process to detect the short run, long run, and other policy shock in the response function? But, and also I think one of the strong motivation could be RDL is in the RDL process. I think if we have a small observation, we have the possibility to do the bootstrapping simulation. I think you can probably already mention it, just I make it share that you can clearly mention it in the ARDL panel ARDL process. You can do the bootstrapping simulation process to look at the inference, whether it is consistent or not, like 5,000, 10,000 up to 20,000. That give you more consistent and the robust parameter, that even your sample is small, but through the bootstrapping simulation process, you already check it that robust parameter. And that could be also one counter argument in compared to the Pedroni and other sort of co-integration approach that you didn't include it in the paper. Regarding the policy, I didn't much to discuss with these issues. I think many other participants has many other questions. So this is just a short clarification. I think it's an excellent paper in the context of South Asia. Thank you very much, Sakib.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ghazi. So, Dr. Sakib, would you like to respond to some of the queries?
Thank you very much, Professor Ghazi Salahuddin, for your very, very valuable comments. You have raised a few of the very valid points. So regarding the issue of the data, of the private and public investment, to be honest, it is the aggregate data. Aggregate data because the variable, the selection of the variable was motivated by the formulation of the theoretical model. So that model actually drives us to take this aggregate data, but we are also working on this issue, like whether like we can find any sort of like, data regarding the share of energy investment in the public and private sector. So we that is a very, very valid point you have raised. Okay, and given this context, actually, once again, saying the data for the private and public investment, actually, they're focusing only the private and public, so did not include the PPP issue. So this is probably a very nice point to, improve or to see further, like, whether that can, like, sort of influence the result. And then I also agree with you, like, we'll do some sort of like, bootstrap simulation to check the robustness. Okay, because, and also I will take into consideration about the issue of the dummy for the structural breaks. For the time being, it was actually used for the construction of the, like, probably as a motivation of the considering the advanced technology, econometric technology, and that's all.
Yes, thank you, Saqib. So I think with regards to the ARDL model
Oh,
choice,
there's
that was best because of the as you highlighted, the series were integrated of different orders, I0 and I1. So
No,
I think
actually,
yeah.
Robindo, we have also checked with the other model, like a technique as well. As it's not only about the panel ARDL test, it's also the other. I think I have mentioned in one of the slide. Let me quickly go through. Only the panel ARDL is reported, but in the footnote, it was clearly mentioned that we have also gone through with the other methodology. But
That's
we
right.
believe
That's right. So there were other methodologies estimated
two other
for
methodologies.
robustness
Yes,
reasons
the
and so
robustness
forth.
test is done. We have also, like,
Yes.
done
So
with two
yeah.
other methodologies.
So Dr. Saqib, I think you have adequately responded to Dr. Ghazi's comments. So with this, it's my pleasure to conclude this session, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for your participation. Now, I would like to pass on the mic back to Dr. Peter Morgan. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks very much,
Thank
Robinda. Excellent session. Now let's move directly to the final session, which is institutional reforms for connecting Asian utilities. The chair is Dina Ajgalieva, who's my colleague, research fellow at ADBI. So Dina, the floor is yours. Thanks very much.
Peter, thank you so much for introduction. Yeah, let's start this session. Thank you very much to Rabindra for managing time so well. We're starting on time. So I would like to invite our next speaker, Dr. Pornchai Tisak, sorry. He's a Dean of Faculty of Law from Chiang Mai University. And he will present his research today on public-private partnership, institutional reform, and challenges for competition law and policy in ASEAN. So I'm very interested to hear what recommendations he will give for competition law in order to improve public-private partnership. Please.
Thank you, Dr. Dina, for your introduction. First of all, I'd like to thank you, ADBI, for organizing this workshop and for the invitation for me to this workshop as well. Let me share my slide and then we can start. Can you see my slide now?
Yes.
Okay. So, let me start on
Sorry, may I interrupt you? We are watching your two screens. Could you please go to display settings and change it?
Two screen, right?
Yeah, on the top, there is display settings.
Can you see now?
No. On the top, there are display settings. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Okay. So I should its presentation now. Would it be okay?
Great.
Okay. So, this paper, not only me, but with the Dr. Chu Kim and with my close colleague from U of New England from Australia. So I've been working with him for one paper about corporate social responsibility. Just to tell you the background of this paper, in 2018, I met Dr. Chu Kim and talked with my friend in Australia because I went to the conference on ACCC, which is the Australian Competition Commission And I present the paper about state enterprise in Southeast Asia. So I did talk with Dr. Chu about possibility to have the paper that tackle on the competition law and policy regarding to the reform in the infrastructure sector in ASEAN. So this is why the start of the paper. So let me start on the outline of the paper. It will start on the introduction of the paper. And also we were looking at the PPP and market power of state with the state enterprise in infrastructure sector. And the third point will be the increasing role of PPP can create a challenge for ASEAN competition law and policy. And also with regarding to the challenge, we have to making sure that we propose something in order to tackle on those challenges. And the fifth part of the paper will be the conclusion of the paper. Before I'm moving on, let me start on the introduction of the paper. It's about ASEAN policy on PPPs. The PPPs in my paper, I haven't put on the definition yet, but I just got the feedback from the reviewer from the paper, from the journals that I should make some definition. Let me define this according to the Professor Graham Hodge from Monash. He said that PPP is just another form of privatization, and the government doesn't want to say it's privatization. And so it's, for me, privatization, PPP, or outsourcing from the public, from the government, it should be defined in the same, arena, because PPP is just kind of like changing ownership from public toward the more private altogether. So this is my definition, is that PPP is kind of like privatization, corporatization, or even outsourcing from the governments. So if we look at the ASEAN's overview, we in ASEAN and every member countries, we have 10 member countries in ASEAN. It seems to be that every country's move forward on PPP's policies. Even in regional level, the ASEAN's regional guideline, ASEAN's policy meeting, everything we move forward, and we like to have more investment from the private investment in order to make sure that we can sustain the development of infrastructure sector in ASEAN. So we have a look, the ASEAN government would like to open opportunity for various private investor, both within the ASEAN and outside, especially from China, from Japan, and from Western countries, from Europe as well. Some of the project, for example, is kind of like regional cooperation between Brunei, Indonesia, and Malaysia. We call growth triangle. And that between the growth triangle, they need a port. So the port will be built by the PPP or the private investor. And also, if you see, have a look on the right-hand side of the picture, is the new ports in Thailand that has to be based on the investment from the private. Because we, in Thailand, we just have a new policy on Eastern Economic Corridor. So that port will have to be under the PPP projects. So this kind of the overview background to show you that ASEAN has got policy in place in order to put forward the PPP project, because government doesn't want to do by themselves. So all the member countries would like to have more private investment, especially in Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Philippines, and Myanmar and Laos as well. So if you have a look on the statistic, honestly, this paper is not purely from the economists, it's from the legal and policy expert, not the expert, but from the idea from legal researcher, because I'm working in the faculty of law. So I just present some statistics that to make sure that you see the overview of how the PPP will be needed or will be implemented in the future. If you have a look on the PPPs needed or the PPP projects that have to be implemented during 2016 until 2030, I think the contribution would be around 5% in Southeast Asia, 5% of overall GDP. For me, it's very huge amount of money that needed to create a PPP project in ASEAN. And in that sense, we have ASEAN Comprehensive Investment Agreement So all investment within ASEAN will be protected. So this boosts up the private investor from member countries to come to invest in, for example, from Singapore to Laos, Singapore to Indonesia, Singapore to Vietnam. It makes sure that every investment has to be protected by that agreement. And also, not only that legal protection, but we have the investment fund as well. So that investment fund is projected to be a main finance for the private investor to invest in so many projects in Southeast Asia. So I think most of the investment are from Japan and China. Some investment from South Korea as well. So this is the overview background that ASEAN is moving forward in order to develop the infrastructure by PPP projects. However, the interesting thing that my paper would like to present is that by having more PPP, we call the private-public partnership, it seemed to have benefit of the PPPs that because in order for the government in ASEAN countries to have the PP projects, they have to reform their market. Yeah. So it seems to be that PPP has increasing roles and replacing the SOE, state enterprise, in the market. SOEs means state enterprise. So, for example, if Thailand want to have a better telecommunication sector, and they want to develop the infrastructure of the telecommunications sector, they will have to permit private investors to come. And the government mainly will have to reduce this monopolistic roles of the state enterprise. So in this point, it's a benefit for making sure that the monopoly structure has to be reformed in order to permit the private investor into the market and create efficiency of the market. In the paper, I present some of the case study on telecommunication sector, on energy sector and transport tech sector. Let me get you some idea. For example, in telecommunication sector, in Malaysia, this is the picture in here. The government starting privatization and permit the PPP project into the telecommunication sector. By that on, this monopoly roles of the government's state enterprise now reducing, and later so many private investors has come into competition in the market. It means that monopolized market structure has been reformed toward the competition in the market. And also, for example, in transport, I'll show you here is the airline system in Thailand. Before we open sky, we have the open sky policy in ASEAN. It seems to be that only Thai Airways and some of the subsidiaries of the Thai Airways can control airline market within the Thai market. However, later on, once we privatize the Thai Airways, which is nearly collapsed now, but anyway, I can explain to you later. It seemed to be that there's so many other private investors come up together and compete in the market. So by this point of view, with the increase of private participants through the PPPs, the state enterprise in ASEAN have to transform themselves toward from the monopolistic or the controller of the market toward only one of the participants of the market. It seemed to be like the building or reforming of the competition into the infrastructure sector in ASEAN by the PPPs. However, of course, let's move on to the third part of the paper. However, the problem is not, the benefits of the PPP is not purely benefit. It's because of the increasing role of the PPP, making sure that they have more market restructure. However, after the markets restructure, there seems to be a problem. So let me provide you some research that I have been working on. It's about PPP collusion and ASEAN competition law and policy. Like so many literature presents that in most of the infrastructure sector in developing countries, and especially in ASEAN, it seems to be that any big project or any large scale investment project, it seems to have kind of collusion between the government and the private investment. Let's see, for example, in Malaysia, there is a potential for establishment of the PPPs, but under the patronage relationship between the government and the private sector. And also in Philippines and in Thailand, you can, if you like, you can read on my paper, but in the overview, it means that even you want to restructure the market by PPP, getting into the market. However, it seems to have the problem that the state enterprise or the government seem to have the collusive behavior to permit only some private investor into the market. So this is the concern, because the collusion behaviors of the bid or of any licensing of the PPP seem to be conflict with the policy of the ASEAN competition law and policy. For example, in Thailand, you see this picture. According to the news, I haven't put on the paper yet, but these high-speed train in the Eastern Economic Corridor in Thailand, the government seemed to point out which company should be the investor instead of providing the fair bid. But the government seemed to choose one company first and then have the bid system, and later that company has won that bid. So this is kind of interesting thing, that a collusive behavior may create another story of economic outcomes rather than making sure that PPPs can create efficiency of the market. So this is...
Sorry for interrupting you. You have less than 2 minutes left.
Oh, yeah, I'll move on. So not only that, after they won the bid, the PPPs become the dominant of the market. It means that they have the power to regulate, not to regulate, the power to monopolize the market instead of the public enterprise. And the problem is that the government and the private investor are colluded, and they have the support from the government. It means that it's not that it is difficult for the Competition Commission or competition law to enforce into that public-private partnership, because they have more power. Government prefer to have them, and the government lack of competitive neutrality. So this is the issue after the project has been granted or after the project has been established. So to fastly move on, once we have that problem, so my suggestion is that we should have the ASEAN competition rules that apply to infrastructure sector in order to make sure that all of the PPP projects in infrastructure sector can be tested by the competition rules in ASEAN. And also, if possible, for me, I would like to have the ASEAN Competition Commission, which is the main regulator for the competition and can oversee all the problem of the unfair bid or the abuse of dominance in the market. And also we have to have the consideration on the free and fair PPPs guidelines in ASEAN, and possibly a competitive neutrality in ASEAN. And also, I haven't fixed it yet, but because according to the reviewer of the paper, they said that there should be focus more on local competition law consideration on the market with regard to the PPP market abuse. So let's come to the conclusion. The need is that we see the benefit of the PPP as the agent for the liberalization. However, the PPP become the problem of the market liberalization after that. So the main important thing that we have to have the ASEAN competition law policy in order to strengthen to tackle on the monopolistic roles of the PPP and the problem of abuse of dominance. So this is all of my presentation. And I think if you have any question, please go on and ask me. Thank you very much. And ขอบคุณครับ
Thank you so much, Pornchai. Thank you very much for your great presentation. I would like to invite our next speaker, Professor Vijay Kumar Singh. He kindly agreed to provide discussion. He read this paper and would like now comment on it. Professor Vijay Kumar Singh, he's a professor and dean at UPES School, School of Law, based in India. Please.
Namaskar from India, and it is indeed a pleasure to be here again amidst you for discussing the paper. And first of all, I would like to thank ADBI and Professor Farhad for thinking of me that I can be a discussant here in this particular session. Excellent presentation, Professor Ponchai, and the paper is also very new, and I see it as a fresh thought because there are plenty of things which is coming up as a new. However, when I see the title of the paper, like PPP's institutional reform and challenges for competition law and policy, this is actually a very broader area to cover because the title speaks about many things. So if I, as a reader, is looking at this particular paper, my expectation is rising very high, and I need a lot of things in this paper. So you may consider this title in light with the problems which are there, which you have come up in your paper as research questions. So I'll come to that in a while. And it is indeed a good paper to work on. If I can take it forward and talk about the structure of the paper, I find the structure of the paper, as you have pointed out, it is in 4 parts, major 4 parts, 1 conclusion. And your paper focuses upon these 3 important elements, right? So one is public-private partnership you are talking about. And then you are talking about institutional reforms as to how this will happen. And then what is the challenges for competition law and policy. So if I look at it from my perspective, maybe I am a bit biased because I work in competition area. So I look this paper focusing more on competition law and policy, that as to how competition law and policy can change the scenario of PPPs and state-owned enterprises, how they can work. And the paper is in the context of ASEAN, and you have primarily focused on Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, and Indonesia, because these are the examples which are coming from. And if I look at the sectors, it is telecommunication, energy, and transport. Though if we are talking about public utilities, as your title says, then there is a bit of a justification needed as to why telecommunication, energy, and transport only. So this is something which I believe can be looked at. In terms of the paper, I think your first part talks about increasing role of PPP in Asian regions. And I think this is something which is a well-established fact in all places, all developing countries. I believe public-private partnership has emerged as a very important tool for development activities. And second part examines the impact of PPPs on SOEs. And definitely this is also a change which has happened across. So state-owned enterprises have been impacted by public-private partnership. And probably it was 1990s when liberalization happened and we wanted to have the foreign investment, different countries, and they wanted to bring measures and important changes in their policies so that the foreign investment finds a cushion in their markets. And that has happened across. So everybody has opened their borders and they have tried to ease out the regulatory requirements at their places. And this is probably the examination which you have done in your paper as to see as to this removal of these regulatory barriers, how they have acted as maybe a competition barrier in one way or the other. This kind of examination, I believe, has been done in some portion of it, examples when you are looking at. Now, if I see the third part of the paper, and which is actually the core of the paper, if I look at it, that is your how PPP obstruct market governance from Asian competition law and policy perspective. And the fourth section talks about your measures or your examples which you have given and your suggestion basically. So it moves into the conclusion part of it. Now let me, I have looked at this paper from a policy debate and controversies perspective. I have not looked at it from the economic because that is not my area of concern. So I actually looked at it from a policy perspective. And if I look at this, I find that the paper can do more justice if you include all the countries of Asia. And at least examine the philosophy of the competition legislation of these countries. I find that the legislations are at different stages. So it ranges from, I think, 1990s, probably the oldest one would be, I think, Indonesia or maybe probably Singapore. And Indonesia and Singapore are doing great as far as, because they are examples for the world also. Singapore probably examples for the world on competition law enforcement. So this, maybe you can categorize the enforcement part of these Asian countries, maybe into A and B or A, B, C, I don't know. That is completely onto you. But as a reader, I would like to, know about each of these particular countries. At least on the competitive neutrality perspective as to when you are talking about PPP and SOEs and how they are impacting the competition law. So that is important, because your suggestion in the fourth point will completely depend upon this, because if your legislation is not at par, you cannot have a single competition legislation which governs this whole regional association. So it is very important that some touch base is very, very important as far as the legislation of these individual countries are concerned. If I take you to further points, so my discussion is basically on three major points from the paper. One is your title and problem statement, which I have already highlighted. So it says increasing role of PPPs in infrastructure utilities and need for institutional reforms from competition law and policy perspective. So as I said before, your focus is competition law and policy perspective and how institutional reforms are needed so that PPPs help in infrastructure. At the same time, they are not overboarding or they are not exceeding their jurisdiction and impacting the competition. So that is the analysis which I find. I find that competitive neutrality is also a very important element for examination. So if comparison is to be done between these countries of Asia, you need to understand as to what is the competitive neutrality framework. And they are quite different, because yesterday night, I was looking at the competition legislation of these Asian countries, and you will find that their treatment to the SOEs are quite different. Similarly, their treatment to the public-private partnership needs to be understood as to how that is operating. And probably that would be necessary for your paper, because you are comparing it that way. And your suggestion would actually be more robust and more forceful when you are examining it from the perspective of the legislation already existing and which are going to be coming. Like, for example, yesterday, I thought this, give me a second. This Cambodia, yes, Cambodia has come up with a draft legislation. Laos is also talking about draft legislation. And there are some who are already into it. So this is something which needs a bit. Then there is one aspect which needs your attention is collusion between cartelists and collusion between private and public enterprises impacting competition. So if you see in these two, collusion are different from the competition perspective, because when we say collusion between cartelists, that is core competition law collusion which we are talking about. But when we are saying collusion between the state government and public-private partnership to impact competition, that is taking a different kind of an angle, that is maybe corruption, or maybe we can say, helping the national bodies or helping the national agencies. Maybe you took an example of airlines industry. So that is what is happening. So something called natural monopoly given or state monopoly given to the private players in the PPP model. That is what is your concern in the paper. In terms of suggestions, I find the abstract, maybe that can be a bit elaborate so that it covers your suggestions and those particular aspects in detail. Introduction is good, and again, as I said, clarity should be there that if you included 5 countries of Asian or 4 of Asian, then what was the rationale for not including others? So that is there. I find Dina on the screen, so I've got the message, so I'm completing it soon. Yeah. So section 1, I don't have much of a suggestion. It requires a bit of addition. Section 2, again, I believe you look at it from the perspective of 3 areas you have taken: telecommunication, energy, transportation. So maybe you can think about other areas like maybe water, sanitation, because there are plenty of areas in which public utilities are working. So if you earmark or pick up few then that justification has to be there that why that only 3 areas have been taken. Maybe there are only case studies. If you mention one line that there are no case studies available in other areas, but at least list the public utilities which are there for consideration. Section 3 here would like to focus specifically that you look on the competitive neutrality as I give this suggestion. So that competitive neutrality perspective needs to be very, very clear. While I was reading the paper, I thought that another dimension which is coming up is lobbying by private players. So how that is operating, like whether that is changing the law, whether that is impacting, like say when there is a public-private partnership happening, whether that relationship is impacting the legislation or it is coming up with some changes. That is also an interesting dimension which can be, at least maybe a thread can be opened in your paper. In terms of the session 4, you have taken EU as an example. So here I had a concern because I think EU as a model may not be very suitable for ASEAN. You can look at it because EU is bound by a larger treaty, and which is not the case in case of ASEAN. There is already probably AECG is already in existence. How that is working. ASEAN Competition Commission, that is a good idea. But the comparative analysis can be done with, CARICOM or COMESA or such kind of a regional associations or competition commissions rather than EU, because EU is in a completely different format, which I believe may not be, in toto applicable in the case of ASEAN. But if it happens, then that is a good way. That can be a suggestion also. And in terms of conclusion, I believe in of the suggestions which I have given in the rest of the session, the conclusion accordingly needs to be amended. And generally what happens in conclusion, we give a quite general conclusion. So it has to be very specific suggestion to whomsoever we are giving. Either if we are giving to the governments, all 10 governments of the ASEAN, then that has to be very specific, that you sit together and maybe come up with something which you have already come up, like AECG. So AECG needs to be implemented properly. They already have a forum. So it is not a case that there is not a forum. There is a forum, but that forum needs to be utilized properly and worked upon. So this is what was the suggestion from my side. And thank you. It was a wonderful read. And thank you, ADBI, for giving this opportunity. Every time you give me an opportunity, I enrich myself. And that is something which is the beauty of these particular sessions. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Dina, for giving me an extra 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Professor Vijay Kumar Singh. Very detailed discussion, lots of comments. Most of them I agree a lot, and regarding policy recommendation about choice of countries, excellent. So we received, I think, we had a question, right, in Q&A, I thought. So if anyone wants to ask, yes, we had a question, I think, yes, for this one. It marked as answered, but I'll read for you out loud, okay? There is one in Q&A from Sarvarti Labov. In my understanding, PPP is not privatization. In the all countries and legal system, PPP mechanism can take rights under the PPP agreement as ownership, possession, or lease. In Uzbekistan, under the PPP law, private partner can have just possession right to the project. After the deadline of PPP agreement, the project and rights on project can be delivered to GOU or decommissioned. So PPP should be seen like mechanism for GOU for resuscitation, and recovery of economics. General position PPP as privatization should be chosen by GOU. So Dr. Porchan, did you hear?
Yeah, I got that. GOU is government-owned enterprise, right? Or what is this? What does GOU stand for? I haven't. Can you clarify?
Government of Uzbekistan, probably. Government of Uzbekistan. GOU.
Okay. Yeah, just to me, thank you for Dr. Vijay. Can I respond or? I agree with you all because it's the paper hasn't been defined yet, and I have to make sure that why I select some countries, and the select some country in ASEAN is because it's short of research, and because of that those countries will seem to have more problem with the PPP and collusion. I will write further on. Thank you for your comment. And also, it's interesting that one of the papers that I have published before many years ago, I compare ASEAN and EU, and I have to revise it because some of the comments said that it should be compared with CARICOM. In this case, I will revise the paper according to your recommendation. So let me move for some, can I answer? Because the PPPs in legal form, in my perspective, according to Professor Graham Hodge, you can search his name. He is the expert from Australia. He mentioned that PPP is the inheritance from the privatization. So this is why I try to define it as the kind of thing that government want to privatize something. So this is my point of view. It can be said that PPP is the project after privatization. However, what is the, I mean, in my opinion, it's not the different way of doing infrastructure development. Government want to do something and government monopolize that sector before, they have to privatize. It means that more private have to come as a stakeholder on that entities. And it's become the private and public partnership. So this is my definition. That's why I researched some literature, and some literature mentioned that it should be the kind of different words that government doesn't want to use, because privatization words seem to have bad connotation for many years. So that's why government moved forward from privatization toward private-public partnerships. But I'm not quite sure about government of Uzbekistan, whether the GOU, what, I mean, I couldn't share that knowledge. If I have more further knowledge about government of Uzbekistan, I will be happy to share with you. And all in all, I mean, everything. Oh, yeah. Another one is competitive notoriety. The thing is that I haven't pushed it forward because it seems to be the problem of implementing competitive notoriety in ASEAN. So I proposed in one of the paper published in US before, but in this paper, I haven't come up with we should do enforcement or competitive notoriety first. But of course, by your recommendation, I will put one section that relating to government have to be notoriety according to the project on the public-private partnerships. Yep. And thank you for your comment. It's very detailed and very, I mean, good for me to write on. And thank you for the question as well. If you have any further questions, just email me or just contact me with the OB.
Okay, so if anyone would like to raise hand, ask a question, I think I can take one question. Yeah. Thank you very much, Abu. Thank you.
Diana, can I?
Yes, please.
Can I?
Yes.
Yes, and it's an interesting paper, and but I would like to say, what is the key research question that is being asked in this paper? I think that is somewhere hidden, that could be brought out explicitly. And to support this process, actually, I will tell that is two things that is happening in the ASEAN. And this competition policy and the public-private sector is a little bit of complex, and the only one country or maybe two countries that has been successfully introduced to this market reform under the PPP. And here we need to see what are the structural, financial, regulatory preconditions for the PPPs in the power sector. That has to be considered, and there is a good amount of information is available in the last ASEAN integration report 2019. Please refer to it and bring into the literature. And second thing is there is no one size fit for all in ASEAN countries. These countries are in a very different stages, and if you see that is among the best performing sectors in the ASEAN, and somehow they are fully or partially implemented the market ODR reforms while retaining the dominance of these monopolies or the state-owned companies. how they gradually liberalize it. There are a few examples that is coming out, and probably you need to refer to this emerging literature, and IDEA did, and also the Singapore University some on the market integration, and probably you may refer to that one to find the new insights into this emerging literature. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, we have to finish discussing this paper. Is it okay? Thank you very much, Anbu, for your great comments. And let's move to our next paper. Our next presenter, Muhammad Arif. He is lecturer from Shahid Benazir Bhutto University, based in Pakistan, and he will present about time frequency connectedness between Asian electricity sectors.
Thank you, Dina. So I'll just share my screen. So you can see my screen.
Yeah, if you can make it, please, full screen. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, I would like to thank ADBI and Dr. Peter Morgan, Dr. Ambu, Dr. Farad, and Dr. Raminda, so for organizing and inviting us to present our paper for this workshop. And this has been a very good learning opportunity for me, being a unexperienced, you could say, scholar. So I learned a lot from the discussions that happened. So this paper has been written by me along with the co-authors. So you can see the names. I'm going to present this paper on behalf of my co-authors here. So I'll just start with the abstract. So our study examines the connectedness of electricity sectors in Asia by employing the connectedness models of DY 2012 and BK 2018. So our analysis reveals strongly connected electricity sectors in the sample Asian countries. So I will explain what countries we took. So this signifies that the electricity utilities of the Asian region have a substantial influence on each other. Connectedness between electricity sector in Asia is more pronounced in the short run. So our frequency-based analysis reveals this result, that the connectedness is more pronounced in the short run. We've gone further and performed subsample analysis for the financial crisis and the pandemic crisis. So our subsample analysis reveals that the electricity sectors are more connected during the pandemic crisis compared to the financial crisis. So I will explain the reason behind that. So what's the background of the paper? So if we look at the reforms in the electricity sector, so the reforms in the electricity sector started from the developed economies like Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and other developed countries. And the Asian countries then slowly introduced the reforms. So if we talk about Asian economies, so the reform process was started during early 1990s, and it's going on process. So there is still a lot of things to be done if we look at the Asia. So if we talk about the objectives of the reforms, so one of the key objectives and that motivated us to write this paper is to achieve the regional integration of electricity sectors. So if we talk about the other examples, so the most prominent example is the Europe, and the studies that we mentioned here, so they explain the integration has led to systematic connectedness across European markets. So this is again one of the background that motivated us to explore the connectedness between the Asian markets. So continuing on with the background. So if we talk about in Asia, so despite some barriers to the bilateral electricity trade, so there is a great deal of potential for electricity sector connectedness. And there has been several initiatives taken. So some of the major initiatives we talk about is Greater Mekong Sub-Regional and Asian Power Index, Power Grid. So these are two of the major initiatives that have been taken in Asia. And there are some examples of electricity trade between the countries, like Vietnam began to import electricity from China, and also China is importing electricity from Myanmar. Similarly, Vietnam and Thailand have been importing electricity from the lower Mekong region. So these examples show that the electricity markets are connected with each other. So if we talk about in a broader context, in a political and regional context, so the regional and political ties across Asian economies are significant. So most of the countries share border with multiple Asian counterparts. So that provide a conducive geographical environment for greater interconnectivity among Asian electricity sectors. And by experience, we know that geographical linkages are the basis for transporting electricity. While the interplay between regional connectivity initiatives and geographical and political linkages strengthen the case for investigating the electricity connectedness, so in Asia, we have other factors that could be detrimental to this connectedness. So that again makes this case interesting. So coming towards the objective, now given that background, so we explore the interconnectedness of electricity markets across the Asian economies. So the significance of this study also stems from the fact that although some operational deficiencies in the electricity trading across European economies have been documented, very little evidence exists on Asian electricity integration process. So this is the objective of the study. So moving towards the data and sample. So we took these 10 Asian countries, China, Hong Kong, India, and others. And our data spans from April 2007 to August 2020. So we took the most recent data. The choice of electricity sector as a subsector of broader utility sectors, because electricity sector is a major or main sector in Asian economies. And there has been many market-based economic reforms in that sector. So this is, again, one of the reasons we took the electricity sector. So if we talk about the methodology, so our methodology is in two parts. So first we look at the connectedness framework of DY that captures the total connectedness. And then we could decompose the total connectedness into short and long terms to see how it varies in short and long term. So just some descriptives. So the mean return values exhibit that electricity sector from Philippines and Vietnam have the highest mean, whereas for Vietnam and Japanese have the lowest returns, right? We observed the highest return variability for electricity sector for Pakistan and South Korea, and Hong Kong and Malaysia exhibits the lowest variation. So moving towards our main results. So if we look at this connectedness map, so we can see that India and Hong Kong emerges as the most connected markets or sectors, and followed by South Korea and Thailand. So if we talk about the least connected sectors, that are Pakistan, Japan, and Vietnam. And if we talk about the directional spillovers, so the Hong Kong receives most directional spillovers from other markets. And if we talk about the spillovers from a market, so that is from the Philippines. Philippine electricity sector surfaces are the leading spillover transmitters. So Philippines transmits the most spillovers to other countries. So then we, as I explained before, that we decompose the connectedness into short and long terms. So again, if we look at the maps, so we see a kind of similar pattern in the short run as of the full sample analysis. So that means that the connectedness is driven by short term. And if we look at the long term map, so the role of Philippines becomes more important in the long term. So that means Philippines plays a major role in long term connectedness, whereas India, Hong Kong, and China plays a major role in short term connectedness. So if you look at these maps, so they are static maps. They don't show a time varying pattern. So we believe that the connectedness is affected by the factors in the market. So to explore that, we move towards finding the time varying connectedness analysis. So that shows like connectedness of around, this is connectedness index score of around 20, right? But if we look at some of the major changes, so the major changes we can see this point here. So this is the Asian financial crisis, or I would rather say that's the Chinese financial crisis. So we can say the connectedness increased because of the uncertainty in the market. And if we see more recent, so that is the pandemic period. So again, the connectedness rose in that period as well. So we can say that the connectedness between the electricity sectors in Asia, so that is driven up by the uncertainty in the market. So again, if we look at the time varying connectedness in short and long term frequencies, so we can again see that a short term frequency play a major role in connectedness, whereas long term connectedness is very low. So our results, the full sample results show interesting insights. So we again tried to see how that, how the electricity sectors interplay if there's an overall crisis in the market. So we took two examples of financial crisis and pandemic crisis. So if we look at the Chinese financial crisis, so we see increased connectedness, but still some of the markets like Vietnam, Pakistan, Malaysia, Japan, so they still doesn't show any connectedness. So if we look at the pandemic crisis, so looking at the pandemic crisis, we see a lot more connectedness. So every other country is connected with the other. So what's the reason behind that? So the reason behind that is the findings suggest that the regional development, such as the progress in the Asian Power Grid Initiative and the expansion of GMS power market and China's Road and Belt Initiative, have increased the connectedness of Asian electricity sectors in the recent years. So that's why we see a very increased connectedness in the pandemic period.
Mohammed, sorry for interrupting. You have 2 minutes left.
Yeah, just I'm concluding. So if we talk about our conclusion, so again, full sample analysis revealed strongly connected electricity sector. Connectedness between electricity utilities in Asia is more pronounced in the short run. And subsample analysis show that the market-wide uncertainty, like the financial crisis and pandemic crisis, drives up the connectedness. Now, some of our implication of the study from the investment point of view of finding construct a contagion network that points out major transmitter receivers of financial distress in the Asian electricity sectors. The findings may therefore provide a broader framework for monitoring and effective management of risk across Asian electricity sector. And from the regulatory and policy perspective, so a better comprehension of electricity sector's dynamic and systemic contribution towards these dynamics is critical. And countries that are strongly connected to the large contributors can also be pinpointed. So we saw that some of the countries are very much connected with each other. So this allows policymakers to control the extent of vulnerability of their domestic electricity markets. So I will conclude with that, and thanks for listening to me. And again, thanks.
Thank you very much, Muhammad, for your great presentation and covering such an important topic for Southeast Asia.
Thank you.
Because we know that two-thirds of energy demand growth in South will be due to Asia and Asia Pacific. So this is important for energy security and for renewable energy. I would like to invite Dr. Ghazi Salahuddin, who kindly agreed to read and provide comments for this paper. Dr. Ghazi Salahuddin, he is associate professor from Linköping University, based in Sweden. And I would like to remind our audience that you can read more detailed biography for all our speakers using the links in the chat. Dr. Ghazi, please.
Yeah, Dr. Arif, could you please stop your share screen? I can like to share my screen.
Yeah, I'll just do it. Yeah, you can do it now.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. So the paper, it was actually excellent paper, the time frequency connectedness between Asian electricity market. So as the paper is little bit strongly driven based on the financial econometrics dependency model, so many of my comment is a little bit very technical in this context rather than too much in the policy side of the discussion. So I mostly focused on a little bit more technicalities of the methodological issues and improvement some of the issues related to the policy context.
Yeah.
So I think you already clearly mentioned it, that the paper is fundamentally based on the selected Asian countries, and by using the most widely used connectedness approach, which was developed by Diebold and Yilmaz 2012. And also I think you also used the Diebold and Yilmaz 2014 paper, also the networks. And then later on then the next is the paper also included the frequency based connected approach by Joseph Barnick and Kralik in 2018. And the important findings of this paper is that electricity market, particularly in Asia, has a strong connectivities, and also they have influencing each other through the spillover process. And also it was mentioned that the regional connectivity initiative and geographical and political linkages strengthen the case for investigating the electricity sector connectedness in Asia, and certain factors could either be determinantal to the process or they also bring it the heterogeneity in the connectedness. So these are the one of the key messages of this paper. So I would like to go for this. One of the critical point in this context that you clearly mentioned it, there is some countries, particularly in the ASEAN countries, are very strongly connected with respect to the import and export of the electricity, but is it all the member countries are connected within the region or not? That is not clear in the paper, such as like India with connected or Pakistan with connected, also the all other region. So is it like some sort of export and import of electricity market, all the member countries in this investigated sample are connected or not? Because one of the strong motivation for your study, it is based on the European context, and European, all the electricity market are very strongly connected each other with respect to demand and supply, as well as with respect to export and import. So I'm interested to know the investigated sample period is connected to each other or not. And second important point is what is the criteria to choosing only this country, why not many other ASEAN countries? Is there any specific reason for choice of this country list? And also how you also said the political linkage, is it the political linkage or the like country, some sort of bilateral trade linkage in the electricity market or investment linkage in the electricity market are more connected? So that's need to be, I just looking for this sort of discussion in the paper. So, and then this study also will look about this subsample analysis is quite interesting. We also find different short run, long run, and pandemic related crisis. Again, I would like to make it clear one thing, even though we are discussing about the electricity market, but it is the stock prices within the respective countries' electricity market. So we are using the stock price indexes, if I understand correctly, stock price indexes for the electricity market. So, and also it is interesting to see, is it the respective countries' stock prices or stock market capitalization of this investment, is it captured the full amount of the investment structure of a given country, or is it the certain investment structure? So how should we conceptualize or framework that this stock market proxy as a proxy for the electricity market price? Like, because then again another question is related to how efficient this market price is, because many of the countries in your list, the stock market is not efficient in the strong form. Then it is related to the market efficiency, then market efficiency connected to the interaction with the electricity price. So these are the things a little bit need to be clear, because if you're thinking about the market in Hong Kong is not the same level of efficient in compared to market in Mumbai or in market in other countries. So how did you shaping up these issues? Because one group of market is very highly developed market, another group of market is most promising or approaching to the developed market. So how did you build this connectivity within this network, or did you think about it, or did you consider on these issues or not? So then also you mentioned it, the previous literature is strongly Europe, and that's I already mentioned it, and also previous literatures also strongly utilizes the wavelet based multi-resolution analysis in the Asian market. When you're discussing about the wavelet, I'm probably a little bit discussed because this is the area also one of my PhD topic. So when we're using the wavelet related issues, one of the most strongly motivation is the trading mechanics. Because you are using the stock market data, and the trading mechanism is you try to capture to the data at the different decomposed based on the signal processing approach from the noise of the information set. So if you have a high level of noise, then it could be more decomposed with the D1, 2 to 4 month or 2 to 4 days in your case, 4 to 8 at the different zone or the different trading. I would like to say you try to highlight it, some of the motivation why you are converted to this wavelet based analysis. One of the motivation of this question could be you can that the different traders, if I like to trade from the investment in the electricity market, different trader has a different objective or trading preference. So for example, maybe I prefer to go to trade in the daily basis. You probably going for the trade in the weekly basis. Maybe Dina would like to trade for the monthly basis. So in order to capture to the trading mechanics of the heterogeneous investor behavior, that particular reason we are looking for the Wavelength-based decomposition process. So it is more, I would like to say, you try to highlight it, some of the motivation from the trading perspective of the electricity market, the why you are using this wavelength decomposition. And second important things in this context, when we're looking about looking about the your data, you are only converted basically two horizon. One is the short term, another in the long term. As the audience of the electricity market, all the energy or the economics related area, so audience are not much well informed the wavelength this short term, because they confuse, because you are using the return data. So these return data means it is always the short run information, but you are working on the horizon. So it is the horizon in terms of the trading perspective of the short term and long term, because it is already the return series. The return series is not explaining the long run. So this creates sometimes the confusion of the reader. So I would like to say you can make it clear what are the trading mechanics between the short term and the long term. And I think you consider only short term 1 to 5 days, like only daily, but why not in weekly? Why not in other sort of horizon? Is there any sensitivity with the other sort of horizon or not? So these are the issues I think you need to think about it to when you write. That's why I write it is very mechanically to written. You need to be write it more economic motivation to explaining these dynamics. And another like counter argument, because we don't need actually, as the paper is more discussing about the ASEAN market connectedness, I feel that the Breton and Claydon 2006 paper, if you are very interested with the causality or directionality, Breton and Claydon 2006 frequency domain-based causality published in Journal of Econometrics, it could be very easy and simpler way to explaining the causality dynamic among the investigated countries. So that could, or if you don't think about why your approach or the way you considering the Joseph Barnick spillover, frequency-based spillover approach is better than the Breton and Claydon, you need to clarify, because you try to more explaining, not, if I understand correctly, not the trading behavior. So you're not much focused on the trading side of your paper. You're most focused on the integration process of the selected Asian countries. So in that context, I think Breton and Claydon paper could be very, very interesting for you. And the last also another, so already we know, because as we have a daily data, it's a high frequency data, and I didn't have much information from your issues, but one of my suspect based on of your descriptive statistic, if you look at your value of the skewness is all are negative, most of them are negative, and Cartouche's value is very high, is the lowest one is 4.26 for Vietnam, but otherwise is quite high. So that's also give the signal that there is a high level of asymmetry and volatility is persistence in the model. So when the volatility are persistent in the model, then there is a question is the based on return series maybe fail to detect the volatility in the spillover connectedness. So as you are using the daily data, stock market data, what I recommended in this context, you need to compute to the volatility with a conditional volatility such as like GARS types of model, and identify your volatility residual, and that could be incorporated in your spillover. In that case, you controlling the uncertainty, some sort of based on the market information.
Dr. Ghazi, sorry for interrupting you. Can you please finalize?
Yeah, so these are some short comment, and last comment is you can also extension, as you mentioned it, there is a couple of uncertainty are observed in your return spillover. These are the uncertainty also available at economic policy uncertainty, and I think you can control it and then to look at the spillover approach. Thank you, Dina. Sorry for taking a little bit longer time.
Yes, thank you. So we still got a few minutes to take some questions. If anyone would like to ask, please. Please.
Yes.
Rabindra.
Hello, hi Dina. I have a question. Well, it's also a suggestion actually. So Dr. Ghazi covered all the methodological aspects of the paper. So that's what I would like to focus more on the policy aspects now. So the motivation for this paper is actually based around electricity markets integration in the Asia region, and more so the push for bilateral interconnectors and so forth. But then they looked at a sample of countries that are not physically interconnected at the moment. And when the results are discussed, the link is back towards the original motivation around having requiring these countries to establish regional interconnectors or bilateral interconnectors to facilitate the greater electricity market integration in the region is not provided. So there is that fundamental policy linkage that's missing at the moment, and I suggest that the authors address that. Otherwise, I mean, it's a good exercise, good paper, time and frequency domain. It's a relatively new technique, I believe, and there are so many papers emerging using these techniques, and that can be summed up in the literature review too. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabindra, for your comments. Porchai, please.
Just thank you for the good presentation. I just would like to add some comment on, if possible, it's about policy review. If you can look at the ASEAN Power Grids report, it's all connected within the ASEAN Power Grids, so you can see further detail of the policy that they have been in place during the time. So in ASEAN, because I just published one paper about ASEAN Power Grids, so it will add up to your policy development or recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Mohammed, if you would like to quickly reply to comments, please go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to thank Dr. Ghazi, Ramindra, and other persons. So yeah, so like most of the comments that Dr. Ghazi Salahuddin made, so these are like some of the comments that we haven't covered. So I would take them as suggestions and would like to incorporate in the revised version of the paper. And we received some of these comments as reviewers' suggestions for the paper. So we are in the process of revision. So hopefully you will see the final, when you see the final version of the paper, you will see that most of them as incorporated, right? So
thank you very much.
I would, yeah.
I think after you revise it, I would like to read it. I think it's very exciting paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So since I don't have any more raised hands and Q&A, I would like to finish this session. Thank you so much for all distinguished speakers. Excellent presentation and excellent discussion. I really enjoyed, and I'm looking forward to read all your revised papers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. So that completes the final session. So I just have to give the concluding remarks. And I found it a very interesting and diverse set of papers. So I'd like to thank all of the presenters and discussants, and also our co-organizers, AREA, and the Economic Policy and Analysis Journal. I think we've seen sort of two broad topics covered here. First is the more perhaps conventional issue of how to increase the efficiency of the power sectors, particularly because, as has been found, in most cases, they aren't very efficient yet. And so we've looked at things like pricing policies, strengthening of regulatory capacity, more reliable government support in the case of subsidies, that sort of thing. But I think perhaps the more important topic going forward is what Rabindra referred to as reform. That how do we address the sort of second generation targets, such as environmental control of environmental pollution, especially control of greenhouse gases. And I think this is extraordinarily important, because certainly global warming is one of the key challenges facing the prospects for a sustainable and inclusive growth going forward, so that we need to bring as much analytical power to bear as possible to try to encourage the shift toward decarbonization, toward increased use of renewable energy resources, that sort of thing. So I'd like to encourage you all to take into account all the suggestions that you've heard today to further improve your papers, and we look forward to the very successful special journal issue. So thank you all very much, and let me close the conference here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you
thanks
from
very much.
Thailand.
Thank you, everyone. See you.
Thanks for organizing the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Hope you guys see. Hope you see you soon. I mean,
Okay.
after the
Thank you so much.
Hope
See
to
you.
see you
Okay.
live, not virtually.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point.
Thank
All right. Thank you very much.
See you.
Okay. Yep.
See
Goodbye.
you.